I think jealousy probably causes more trouble than good. Should you care if your partner pays undue attention to someone of the opposite sex they find attractive? Well, probably you should care. You might even say something about it. Or there's envy where your partner is attracting attention, status, success, any of those things, and you're jealous of that. That's not helpful. I don't think competition between people who are in a monogamous relationship is useful, particularly. It's not zero-sum competition, not existential competition. You're on the same team. That's the point.
Right.
You know, and if one of you is feeling left behind for one reason or another, it's time to throw that out on the table. It's very hard.
Yeah.
These conversations are extremely difficult. It's no wonder people avoid them. I also think people are not taught to negotiate.
Oh, man.
At all. This is what I want. Then you tell the person, then you strategize with them so that you can get what you want and they can get what they want, and you both know what that is, and away you go together. People fool themselves into thinking that it's okay what they're doing. I'm sacrificing myself for the children, and that's okay. I'm sacrificing myself for my husband's career, and that's okay. Sometimes that is okay, but it has to be out, clear, in the open, talked about, negotiated, discussed. You know, I think you can be a slave or a tyrant, or you can negotiate. And then we pretend that everything's all right. And then it blows up in our faces and we end up divorced. If you do lay it out and negotiate it, then you have two people working in the same direction, and they each bring their different viewpoints to bear on the problem. And sometimes that'll save you, you know, that additional cognitive complexity you have because there's two of you instead of one. Generally speaking, men would like to have sex more frequently than women. So that's a sticking point in many relationships. The probability that one partner and the other partner are going to have exactly the same level of sexual interest, say with regards to frequency, is quite low. So there's going to be friction there. I'd like to have sex 15 times a week. Well, I'd like to have sex once a week. The logical meeting point there would be in the middle. But then that has to be planned out. And you also have to say exactly what you mean. Well, exactly what do you mean by sex? These are painful discussions often. It's very funny in some sense that people will do and desire things that they won't talk about.
Why is it so hard for us to admit what we want?
We're ashamed of it. You know, people say, well, you shouldn't be ashamed of sex. It's like, well, really? Really? No, that's a stupid theory. We arrest people who expose themselves in public. We assume they should be ashamed enough not to do that. Shame regulates sexual behavior. So we're embarrassed about our desires. What you might be able to do is to determine how to play out your sexual life in the confines of your relationship in a manner that neither of you do find shameful. I believe that solutions to that problem can be negotiated, but it's what everyone wants. But it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to bring about. Have you got the day-to-day aggravations with each other that are dragging you down and making you resentful under control so that you actually do want to give your partner some pleasure? Like, these things are very hard, but they're not impossible. On one hand, we think any sexual misbehavior should be subject to the harshest of punishments, and everything goes and is acceptable. It's like, well, good luck having both of those ideas. Every little bump in the relationship is the potential dissolution of the entire relationship. If your whole life is, well, every time you get out of line, I'm out of here. It's like, how the hell are you? First of all, you're not going to admit to ever doing anything wrong. Second, you're going to be you're like a scared cat the entire relationship because, well, who knows? It could just come to an end at any moment. Look, I know that you're trouble. Me too. So we won't leave, no matter what happens. Well, that's a hell of a vow, but that's why it's a vow, right? That's why you take it in front of a bunch of people. That's why it's supposed to be a sacred act. Well, I'm stuck with you. So how about we fix things? Because the alternative is we're going to be in a boxing match for the next 40 years. That's the alternative. So, and you think you're going to fix problems without something like that hanging over your head? There isn't a chance. You don't put your partner down in public. Why?
Well, it's not because you're hurting that person's feelings. That's not why. It's that you're denigrating the relationship that you are in voluntarily. You have a responsibility to those whom you love and are obligated to ensure that they manifest themselves in a manner that's most beneficial to them over the long run. You help your wife figure out how not to make a fool of herself in public. And she extends to you the same courtesy. And it's partly maintenance of the sacred nature of the relationship. It has nothing to do with you or her, precisely. You're going to pay a price for speaking up. But you're going to pay a price for not speaking up. If you decide not to make your stand, you weaken your... If you do it 100 times, then even if the monster was only this big, now you're this big, it's going to eat you. You know, when it was this big, you probably could have kicked it across the room. It's too late for that. Let's say we're having a conversation and it's flowing melodically, and all of a sudden I say something and there's a disjunction, right? You're offended by it. There's some negative emotion that comes up. Something went wrong. Something didn't work out. I'm not looking at the world properly, or I don't know you well enough, or as well as I thought. There's something there, and if I have any sense, I'm going to focus my attention on that. As soon as what we're doing together isn't working, then that's instant evidence that there's something about us that needs to be updated. And you might think, well, that's a terrible thing. And the answer is yes, of course it is. It's a terrible thing. But it's also the thing, and this is the next stage of the development of this, let's call it universal morality. What should you do when you make a mistake? Now, one answer is catastrophic dissolution. That's a collapse into chaos. Well, no one is going to pick that voluntarily. Worse, it can mean the absence of positive emotion. Because if you really collapse into chaos, not only are you overwhelmed by negative emotion, but the positive emotion system shut off, and that's what happens to someone who's extraordinarily depressed and also hyper anxious at the same time. Okay, so that's not an optimal solution because it takes you out. The other possible, and so I would call that a nihilistic solution or a chaotic solution. It's not a solution, it's a dissolution. The other solution is, we're talking and I don't get what I want from you. And so I say, you better not do that again. I don't want to see that. From you again. Society is made up of threats like that to some degree. It's an ineradicable part of society. That would be the tyrannical aspect of the great king, let's say. Generally speaking, in a society that's functional, we've decided to adopt agreement with that set of principles more or less voluntarily. I'm willing to pay a price for yours, including the acceptance of punishment if I transgress, but you're going to do the same for me. So there are intelligent ways that punishment and threat can be used and bounded. One of the methods that I can choose to use if I don't want to encounter error, is just to enforce my will on everyone else. And I think when that happens personally, and in the family, and in the community, and in the state, all at the same time, then you get the emergence of a tyranny.